Authors Press.
Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. And on the line with us today, we have Marissa Lorenzana Wallace. We'll be discussing her fantastic book, It's Going to Be Okay, available at authorspress.com. And guys, be aware there are also ebooks available for it. So one more time, that's It's Going to Be Okay, available at authorspress.com. Marissa was brought to our network today by some of the best movers in the business, Authors Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, move it through Authors Press. You can find them at authorspress.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Marissa here on the line because her book, right there in the title, you know it's going to be a feel-good story, right? You know exactly, maybe not the specific issue in which we're discussing or the specific challenge in which we're approaching, but right in that title, It's Going to Be Okay. You know that this is something that is meant to help. It's meant to really educate its readers. And I'm so excited that we have Marissa here on the line because, listen, she's going to be talking from her perspective, okay? It's a memoir narrative, but it's really meant to educate. It's really meant to help parents who are raising children with disabilities, and also those members of society that maybe don't have children yet, but encounter members of the society with a disability. And specifically within this narrative, we're going to be talking about children with autism. Now, anybody who's ever encountered an individual with autism knows that there's a reason why the term spectrum has been categorized, right? There's a lot of variations to individuals that have autism. And, you know, this is something that is a particular interest to me. I know a number of people that have children that have autism. It is something that is definitely, as Marissa is going to point out, it's something that's on the rise. It's something that we encounter often in our society. And I love the fact that, you know, in pop culture, we see a lot of shows and movies being developed with main characters that are on the spectrum or are, you know, some way influenced by other individuals that have it. So I love the fact that mainstream media is bringing more of an awareness to it. But at the end of the day, there is so much education that can still be received. And I'm very excited that we have Marissa here on the line because, again, she's talking from her perspective and her experience dealing with it. And keep in mind when we're listening, guys, how can these tips, how can her story influence our journey? And listen, she's the expert. She's written the book. She's going to be able to articulate all the nuances much better than I ever could. So without further adu, let's bring her here with us. Marissa, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
Thank you. Hi, I'm absolutely fine. I'm really well. Thank you so much for asking.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're very much looking forward to this. We're very much looking to the education that we're going to be able to receive from you. And I know we have a lot of information to cover. Before we get into the book itself, Marissa, let's hold off slightly. Start by telling our listening audience a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, I am Marissa Lorenzana Wallace. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley down in deep South Texas. I'm from a little town called Mercedes, just like the car. And I'm about 20 miles from the border of Mexico. And I went to Mercedes High School, graduated in 1987, and went to University of North Texas up in Denton, Texas. And I graduated from there, and I taught in Lewisville, Texas. And I was there for many years until I got married and came back to the Rio Grande Valley and married my husband, who's a pharmacist. And pretty soon after that, I had Ethan, who's autistic.
Fantastic. What a wonderful background. What a wonderful family it sounds like you've established for yourself. And, you know, Marissa, before we jump into the interview, let me be the first person here on our network to really congratulate you and commend you for all the work that you had done as an educator, molding the young minds of the future, because I had a very brief stint in education myself. My significant other is a current high school teacher, and she's been teaching for about 15 years. And I know first and foremost how difficult it is, A, to be an educator, and how you never receive the amount of praise in which you deserve for all the work that you have to do. So thank you very much for everything that you've been able to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really, truly do appreciate that.
Absolutely. Now, Marissa, without further ado, It's Going to Be Okay. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Okay, well, my last year teaching was actually the spring of 2006, and my son was actually supposed to be born in August of 2006, but decided to make his debut a week before school was over. So I went into labor during class, and I had to quickly remove the children, my fifth grade class, to another classroom, and I called the principal right away. And that weekend, Ethan was born. He was actually 3 months premature. He weighed 2 pounds, and he was 14 inches. And because I was a teacher and I had a lot of training and special education training courses, I had students who were actually on spectrum, who were autistic, Down syndrome as well. And Ethan actually was in the hospital for 100 days because he was so tiny. But we brought him home fall of 2006. I knew right away he was autistic. He couldn't do things other children could do at his age. And I left my teaching profession. I sacrificed my career to raise my son. And it's been a joyful experience. And he has taught me a lot more than I can ever read or anything. It's just, he's exceptional and extraordinary. He didn't talk until he was in second grade. He didn't walk until he was 3 years old. And pretty much I carried him. And my book is actually little episodes of everyday challenges, some good, some bad, and wanting to educate the public, as these children they're special. My son took a lot longer to develop, but that didn't mean that he was slow in any way. He just learned differently. And like right now, he's actually going to be 15 next month, and he's an artist. He's a painter. He loves to sing. He has an incredible voice. And but my book, hopefully, it inspires people to look at children and or adults differently. It's just that's the way God designed them, and we should accept them the way they are, 100%. They will surprise you, and that's what I did. One day I just started writing little stories, little episodes of everyday encounters that I went through with my son.
Now, Marissa, articulate to our listening audience in terms of inspiration. So, of course, as you've articulated, you left teaching to be there to help take care of your son full time. And we understand, of course, why it was impactful for you to, of course, take and document these occurrences. Now, why did you feel compelled to then take it a step further, take this information, put it out in a book for the public to partake in as well?
For example, a few years ago, I took Ethan, we went to the mall. It was, of course, before this pandemic. I took him to the mall, and we went up the escalator, and he was afraid. He was afraid of the escalator. And pretty soon, I first carried him, and he then all of a sudden says, "Mom, can I go by myself?" And as a mother, I'm like, I don't know, why don't we go on it another couple of times so you can get used to that? Okay, so we went up and down the escalator, and at the end, he's like, he takes my hand, goes, "You stay here. I'm going to go. I'm going to do it by myself." So I'm like, okay, I was nervous. Any mother would be.
Of course.
And he goes up and down the stairs. He did it. And he came down the escalator. I was waiting for him right at the entrance. And he was jumping up and down. He was so happy, flapping his hands. And he goes, "I did it. I did it." I said, "Yes, you did. You did." he goes, can I do it again? I said, yes, you may. Go and do it again. Now, at that time, a police officer approaches me and he tells me, ma'am, the escalator's not a toy. And so I looked at the police officer and I told him, sir, I'm his mother. I can't live forever. He has to learn to be independent. He has to learn how to go up and down the escalators, because for other people, it may be easy. It's very simple. But for him, it was very difficult. And he goes, and everything I do for my son, you think we're playing, but we're not. It's actually educational.
Absolutely.
Because he needs to learn to be on his own, because I cannot live for another 50 years. I have to make sure that he has the tools to survive on his own and to go around where he needs to be. And so the police officer looks at me and he goes, ma'am, I am so sorry. I'm truly sorry. I never thought about that. I never thought, I just thought that, your child was just playing. You were playing. I said, no, there's always a purpose behind it. And he goes, I will be seeing things differently now, because you're right. People, children, they need to learn to be independent, especially when they're autistic, because of course I can't live forever. And he goes, I am so sorry. And I said, no problem. I'm just glad that you realized, not only I, but, I'm sure you're going to encounter a lot more, because I just want you to know that we're not doing it just to play around. We're doing it because there's a purpose behind it. So he just shakes my hand and goes, God bless you. And he just kept on his way. And then Ethan was just coming down the escalator. He rubbed his hands on his head. And Ethan was just happy and just smiled. And he goes, hello, and just walked towards me. And he was so happy. He was very happy that he did it himself.
Guys, again, here on the line with Marissa Lorenzana Wallace. We're discussing her book, It's Going to Be Okay, available at authorspress.com. And remember, there are ebooks also available for the book. Now, Marissa, next question that I'd love to get into, and what a perfect segue you've established for us, because you're talking about, through that experience, so many things were learned, right? You raised the awareness of this officer, who then started to change his overall outlook on his perception with individuals with autism. I mean, probably with individuals across the board, but especially with individuals with autism. Now, I want to go into specific tips that you can offer. Now, again, in that example that you provided, it was more so of a tip for somebody else that doesn't have a direct correlation with someone that has autism. So they need to raise their awareness on how to really work with someone that way. But the same thing can also be applied to someone that is a parent having a child with autism for the first time, and they're learning as they go as well. Talk to our listening audience. Mm-hmm. What tips or words of wisdom would you be able to impart for them?
Well, as a parent, and of course as a former teacher, I always had to carry toys, especially little toys that spin or that would a flashlight. I would always carry some kind of a little device that would that would illuminate light. And that's one thing that Ethan and I noticed that a lot of his classmates, they tend to focus on. So another example is I always carry that in my purse or in my truck. And when I see a parent, which I actually did at the hospital before the pandemic, it was Ethan had an appointment, and there was a little girl. She refused to get inside the car, and her mom was just crying and yelling at her. So I took my son by the hand, and I said, "It's going to be okay. And I just need you to remain quiet if you can. Okay, so we're going to help a little girl. Okay, Mom, let's go help her. Let's go help her." So he was the one pushing me and pulling me towards her. And I said, okay, let's just approach quietly and, slowly. And so I just reach into my purse and I get a little toy, and it spins. It spins and it has light. So the little girl looks at it, and I told the mother, I said, it's going to be okay. I said, I'm a teacher. My son's autistic. And she just looked at me and cried. I said, here you go. And I said, honey, can you go inside the truck? Can you go in your car? You can have this. And she just looked, she was a teenager. She was older than my son. So she just looked at the light. She looked at it like a lollipop. So she grabbed it. And I said, it's going to be okay. So her mother helped her inside, and she was fine. She was transformed in like quiet peace. And all she did was look at that light. And so the mother whispered to me, goes, thank you so much. So I said, no, anytime. I said, my son went through that, or it goes through that once in a while. And I'm always ready to have something like that. So she was, I can give it back. I said, no, keep it. It's all right. I have a bunch of toys at home. And so it's not a problem. So she calmed down. And the first thing is, you have to be quiet, calm down, don't yell, because that makes the situation worse. So the little girl just went inside her mom's car, and her mother was just in tears, and she said, thank you. She whispered, thank you. And I said, you're welcome. And that she just left, and I was able to help somebody. And I've been in situations where parents, sometimes they lose their cool, and I get it. I do get it, and it's understandable. But others, strangers, sometimes they get aggravated, they get annoyed. And I have plenty of those stories as well. And sometimes they're like, you need to discipline your child. And I'm like, okay, how can I discipline the autism out of them?
Right.
And so they're like taken back. And I'm like, you can't. You just you accept and you understand. That's all you can do. And just pray that these people have the understanding and the caring and the patience to step back and just leave the child alone. And eventually they'll be fine. They'll calm down. So, and that's why I always carry with me toys, flashlights, just so, because that's what they like. They focus on that. And that actually alleviates the anger or, the frustration in them.
Wonderful. What I think is really so beautiful about your book, and really where I think a lot of the power in your book lies, for me, so much of the information in which you're talking about is fantastic. But I love the fact that within your book, and you've mentioned it multiple times already in this interview, is, listen, you talk about the good times and you also talk about the bad, right? You're not writing this book from the standpoint of just trying to preach of all the successes in which you had. You understand, and you're being very real and open and honest and very transparent about the fact that, hey, listen, not every time is successful. There are going to be some tougher instances, and in those moments, patience is what is required. I'm only human. Right. It hasn't worked all of the time for me either, and these are some of the experiences in which I had, in which it could have gone a little bit better, but this is what I learned from it. And I think when we really stop and analyze it from that perspective, really what you're doing is you're formulating a connection with your readers, because you're making yourself, you're humanizing yourself, right? And it sounds funny when you say it that way, because clearly we understand you're a human, right? You're not an alien.
Right.
But we understand the experiences that you're going through. And because of that, it's relatable, and it formulates that bridge and that connection. Absolutely fantastic. Right. Marissa, talk to our listening audience. What type of research did you do in preparation for this book?
Well, aside of being a teacher and, of course, my important role now as mother, I would attend region classes as far as Region 1 educational. That's our main facility in Edinburgh, Texas, where teachers go and meet and they talk about autism or special needs children, and we do research. And so how to desensitize the environment for them, sensory rooms. And I was always an advocate for my son's school, because they did not have a sensory room in elementary, which I would always do the research, and I would always address the school board, that it's very critical and it's necessary for these children to desensitize. Sometimes when they're upset, especially when they have fire alarms, those, they on occasion, the school district does have a fire alarm practice, and that's loud. The bell is so loud, and the children get very upset. And so I try to, talk to the proper channels, the principal, administrator, superintendent, that they do need to have some kind of a room to calm down. And it's basically, it was an extra room where we can actually fill it in for these children to calm down. And it's on the word. And sometimes I do get upset with the school board. For instance, the previous superintendent addressed the school board because he was actually the school. They all wanted to make a new football stadium, and he wanted to get $250,000, $250,000 from special education, which is, of course, anybody who's a teacher, they know it's illegal. That's government funding, which you do not touch. That's illegal. Well, he tells everyone that he addresses the board and the parents, that he's going to pay it back. Well, to this day, I still don't even know whether he did or didn't, and I do ask under open records. So he took this money, and I was furious because as a parent, as a taxpayer, this money is allocated for these children. Why are you taking it for a stadium? So there was a lot of penalties he ended up paying because he did that illegally. And I'm always an advocate for children, that this is what they earned this. This is their money. This is where they go to Disney on Ice. This is where they go to they get their books, they get, their equipment, they get iPads, they get Chromebooks, they get things that's necessary for them. Well, since this man, the superintendent ended up taking $250,000, and he never actually replaced it. So I, did involve Texas Education Agency up in Austin, Texas, and it got, it did get some news coverage because what he did was illegal. Soon after that, he resigned. So it's always a good and there's always the bad that, I could not imagine my son going through life without, what he's earned, what he worked so hard for. And I am, as a former teacher, I do speak my mind, and but of course I'm very what is the word? I'm very careful as to how do I address these issues very carefully with the school board. So my son, not only my son, but the rest of his classmates got what they deserved, and they were able to get their iPads and Chromebooks and part of the curriculum. Everything was ready for them. So a lot of parents call me. And they have issues or they have problems, and I direct them to the proper channel, to the proper authorities for them to talk to them and speak to them to tell them what's going on. Because most of the time they don't say anything, and they're afraid.
What more can be said? I mean, such a fantastic book, and there's so much more information in which we could cover. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I mean, there is so much valuable information here. You know what you got to do, okay? You have to head on over to authorspress.com and pick up your copy of It's Going to Be Okay by Marissa Lorenzana Wallace. We've discussed so many valuable pieces of information, but at the same time, there's so much more left to be discovered. Be mindful of the fact that, again, as we stated, autism is on the rise. So if you haven't encountered someone with autism yet, be prepared. It's probably going to happen in the near future. And when it does, whether it's someone that's in your family, whether it's your child or a family member or someone that you just encounter, patience and understanding are of utmost importance. And at the end of the day, we can all exist here on the world like anything else. It just takes the proper knowledge and education to be able to coexist. Once we understand each other, that's when we're able to break down barriers. Marissa, again, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you very much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. I loved it a lot. It was great.